There have been some very odd wars fought in human history for odd reasons, and one of the strangest of those wars demonstrates the fact that sometimes things done with the best of intentions can have horrible results. That time when China went to war with sparrows deserves to be remembered. In 1958, the newspaper The Peking People's Daily proclaimed a declaration of war from the nation's leader, Mao Zedong. "No warrior shall be withdrawn until the battle is won. All must join battle ardently and courageously. We must persevere with the doggedness of revolutionaries." This was not a small conflict that was being declared, not a border engagement. This enemy required the attention of all of China's estimated 630 million population. This was a battle to the death that required not just the military, but one in which even school children would be expected to take up arms. Every citizen would be expected to kill the enemy, and those kills would be counted to ensure that each and every warrior was doing his patriotic duty. In China, in 1958, to lag behind in a conflict declared by the government could mean severe punishment. China moved as one, and dissent was not allowed. Across the nation, the radio played an anthem. "Arise, arise, O millions with one heart, braving the enemy's fire. March on." So what was this mortal enemy that had to be pursued with such dogged determination? Passer montanus, better known as the Eurasian tree sparrow. The sparrow, distinguished by a chestnut-colored crown and nape, a black bib, and one black patch on an otherwise pure white cheek, is widespread throughout temperate areas of Eurasia and Southeast Asia. Tree sparrows are about 12.5 to 14 centimeters, or 5.5 inches long. Through much of Europe, a similar species, Passer domesticus, otherwise known as the house sparrow, is more associated with human habitation, whereas the tree sparrows tend to live in the woods. House sparrows are larger than tree sparrows and more aggressive, tending to drive tree sparrows out of nesting places. But in Asia, the tree sparrow lives commonly in towns and cities. Tree sparrows eat grains and seeds, but also eat invertebrates, insects, spiders, centipedes, and millipedes. So why would China go to war with sparrows? An estimated 14 million people died in China during the Second World War. China was in fact at war with Japan before the German invasion of Poland, which is usually considered the start of the Second World War. During part of that war, China was really fighting two wars, as the Chinese Civil War was being fought between 1927 and 1937, at the same time that China was fighting Japan. Although the Nationalists and the Red Army made common cause against Japan between 1937 and 1945, clashes between their forces continued. The conflict exploded into open warfare again in 1946, killing an estimated 6 million more. When Chairman Mao declared the creation of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the country had been at constant warfare for 22 years, and there were years more of insurgencies. Development had stagnated and the population was largely poor. Public health was in a dismal state, with infant mortality as high as 300 per 1,000 live births. Disease was rampant, with tuberculosis, plague, cholera, polio, malaria, smallpox, and hookworm endemic throughout much of the country, and recurring cholera epidemics that, in some years, killed tens of thousands. Thus, when in 1958 Chairman Mao and the Communist Party of China initiated a plan called the Great Leap Forward, intended to rapidly transform China from an agrarian society to an industrial society, a great patriotic health campaign was included among the many reforms of the period. The campaign was called the Pests Campaign and targeted rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. The program amounted to a carte blanche issued to the people to fulfill their duty to the nation through the massacre of the small, bothersome animals and insects. So why were sparrows on the list with rats and mosquitoes? Chinese scientists had calculated that each sparrow consumed 4.5 kilograms of grain each year, and that for every million sparrows killed, there would be food for 60,000 people. Part of the goal of the Great Leap Forward was to increase agricultural production via the use of communal farms. The sparrows were seen as a threat to production at a time when the government was promising a multifold increase in food production. An environmentalist may be concerned with such a radical attack on the ecosystem, but Mao was convinced. Journalist Dai Qing argues that Mao knew nothing about animals. He didn't want to discuss his plan or listen to experts. He just decided that the 4 pests should be killed. During the era, scientists who challenged the government were often denounced or repressed, and the result was that a revolution based on science was often driven by bad science. One historian described the philosophy of science during the period as one of better read than expert, as political ideology was valued above scientific principles. The traditional Chinese religions of Confucianism and Taoism tended to stress living in harmony with nature. Sparrows were a common theme in traditional Chinese art. But Mao saw nature as being subservient to man. In May 1958, he said in a speech to the Party Congress, "Make the high mountain bow its head, make the river yield its way." Mao used a common phrase, "Ren Ding Shen Qian," meaning man must conquer nature, as the motto of the program. For example, Mao was a great supporter of the ideas of a Russian biologist named Trofim Lysenko. Lysenko theorized that, under the proper conditions, nature can provide virtually limitless resources. The philosophy was particularly appealing to a nation looking to create super-productive agricultural communes. The problem was that Lysenko was almost completely wrong about science, something that could happen more readily in a nation where scientific dissent was repressed in the name of ideology. Among his dangerously flawed biological ideas, Lysenko theorized that seeds should be planted very close together, under the idea that a species would never cannibalize itself. In that he was simply wrong. Seeds planted so close together do compete, resulting in stunted plants and reduced yield. China was able to apply a huge amount of effort and unity of purpose. Built over the course of a decade, the Red Flag Canal runs along a mountain cliff and through 44 tunnels across the Taihang Mountains, diverting water from the Jiang River to valleys in northern Henan province. Astoundingly, the 71-kilometer or 44-mile canal was built using hand tools, and yet the construction of the canal saw more earth moved in a single week in 1959 than the total move to create the entire Panama Canal. The same type of effort was put into the war against sparrows. Mao directed, "Here is the method. We make our resolution, we coordinate our actions, we divide our tasks, we cut off the food supply, we set up a trap, and we continue our battle of destruction." The public health campaign was implemented by everyone, from troops of children to the elderly. The population took to banging pots and pans or beating drums to scare the birds from landing, forcing them to fly until they fell from the sky in exhaustion. Sparrow nests were torn down, eggs were broken, and nestlings were killed. Sparrows and other birds were shot from the sky. One witness from the time explained, "It was fun to wipe out the four pests. The whole school went to kill sparrows. We made ladders to knock down their nests and beat gongs in the evenings when they were coming home to roost." The campaign was made into an ideological battle, with the government declaring that birds are public animals of capitalism. Contests were held among enterprises, government agencies, and schools over those who handed in the largest number of dead sparrows. A Polish diplomat from the time recalled that when the Polish embassy in Beijing denied the Chinese request to enter the embassy premises to scare away the sparrows there, the Chinese merely surrounded the embassy with people beating drums. After 2 days of constant drumming, the Poles had to use shovels to clear the embassy of dead sparrows. A newspaper in Shanghai gave a description of the campaign. The citywide battle to destroy the sparrows began. In large and small streets, red flags were waving. On the buildings and in the courtyards, open spaces, roads, and rural farm fields, there were numerous scarecrows, sentries, elementary and middle school students, government office employees, factory workers, farmers, and People's Liberation Army shouting their war cries. In the city and the outskirts, almost half of the labor force was mobilized into the anti-sparrow army. Usually the young people were responsible for trapping, poisoning, and attacking the sparrows, while the old people and the children kept sentry watch. The factories in the city committed themselves into the war effort, even as they guaranteed that they would maintain production levels. In the parks, cemeteries, and hothouses, where there were fewer people around, 150 free fire zones were set up for shooting the sparrows. The Nanyang Girls Middle School Rifle Team received training in the techniques for shooting birds. Thus, the citizens fought a total war against the sparrows. By 8 p.m. tonight, it is estimated that a total of 194,432 sparrows have been killed. China has never reported exactly how many sparrows were killed in the campaign, but the estimates are that at least many millions were killed, and that the species nearly disappeared in China before, in 1960, the flaw in the idea became apparent. Researchers at China's Academy of Sciences performed autopsy on several of the dead sparrows and determined that the birds ate large numbers of insects, largely agricultural pests. Simply put, the bugs the sparrows ate would have done far more damage to crops than the sparrows. Killing sparrows was, in fact, causing a greater loss in crops. Locust populations soared, devastating harvests. In 1960, the party replaced sparrows with bed bugs in the Pests Campaign. It is amazing, given its almost unimaginable scope, how little the rest of the world knows about what in China is referred to as the 3 years of Great Chinese Famine between 1959 and 1961. Chinese government figures say that some 15 million people died of starvation and related diseases during these 3 years. And if that's true, that means that more people died in China due to the famine than died in China due to the Second World War. But most estimates assume that those government figures are far from reality. Independent estimates assume that between 30 and 45 million people actually died in the Great Chinese Famine, one of the worst famines in world history. And of course, the famine wasn't just caused by the Sparrow Campaign. There were numerous policy failures. For example, Lysenko's close planting theory simply didn't work and ended up causing many fields to be lost entirely to rot. Government officials were afraid that they would be punished if they didn't meet their production quotas, and so they falsified their numbers, which caused an illusion of abundance that kept government from acting. Even as the people of China were starving, the government of China was selling grain on the world market in order to get money to pay debts and shifting fields from food to cash crops. This is, of course, not the only time in history that politics and economics came together to cause an environmental disaster to the detriment of the government's citizens. But the poorly conceived and yet incredibly effective campaign against sparrows in China, which then caused a plague of locusts, is a great example of policy failure on the grandest level. As went the sparrows, so went the people. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.